Good evening and welcome.
You are now live, Martin. Ready to go.
Okay, good evening. Welcome to the Executive Scrutiny Board meeting for August. Do you have apologies, please?
Chair, I have apologies from Councillors Evans and Willoughby.
Otherwise, it looks as though we're all in attendance. Is that correct? Yeah, I think so. I have no late items, so on to item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, please? Okay, I take that Simon says there are not. So moving on to item 4, which are the minutes of the last meeting, which you've all had copies of. Can I take these as a true and accurate reflection of that meeting?
Yes, Chair.
I move that.
Thank you very much. Any matters arising that are not on the agenda that are of urgent nature? If not, we'll move on to the forward plan, item 5.
Chair, may I just mention that there was discussion at Audit and Accounts meeting about where best to look at the way in which the City Council has dealt with the COVID emergency and how it might be taking things forward from that, and it wasn't really left as to anything, but there was a possibility that sort of thing could be discussed at one of these meetings. So it may be something that we need to think about for September. I might talk to you about that separately.
Yeah, Alex, if we can perhaps have a chat with Lindsay and Stephen and others, and maybe our colleagues Kirsty and Gamal about that possibility.
Absolutely, Chair. And the other thing to consider is that the performance forward plan for this year for the Executive Scrutiny Board is still to be agreed. So I think that's something that my colleague Stephen is going to pick up with you outside of the meeting. And then hopefully by the time of the next meeting in September, there'll be a full plan for Executive Scrutiny, and that would be a natural thing to include on that document.
Unless we feel it's one for adult health scrutiny. Well, the health scrutiny. Possibly, but
I think it's obviously wider than health because there's so many economic implications as well.
Okay, yeah, well, I'm open to suggestions, so let's park that for now and get on with the meeting, but we will certainly come back to that, Lucy. Thank you for raising it. Forward plan. Any comments on the forward plan? Okay, if not, that's for noting. Item 6 is the Cabinet response to scrutiny recommendations. The recommendation is to note the responses from the Cabinet. Any comments at all? If not, we'll just note it.
Happy to note.
So we're moving on to the main agenda, main item 7, Council Cabinet agenda. We have 2 items on there to look at. Item 8, primarily the overnight short breaks. Respite for adult care. Do we at this meeting, Alex, just remind me, deal with item 7? I think that's pretty straightforward, isn't it?
Thanks, Chair. I think it's at your discretion where you start the scrutiny of the Cabinet agenda, but normally that scrutiny would take place on the substantive items on the agenda, so that would start with item 8.
That's great. Let's start off with 8 then. Overnight short breaks, respite for adults. Who's taking that? Is it Kirsty or Gamal?
Kirsty.
Okay, Kirsty, nice to hear your voice again. You all right?
Yes, I'm fine. I saw you today when I was driving back from the council house. You were clearly out for a stroll. And it wasn't...
Right. Yeah. Yes, I was going to the park with Nicola. Yeah.
With a bit of fresh air. Anyway, that is an aside. This report is reasonably straightforward. It's asking Cabinet to approve a procurement activity that we feel we need in adults so that we've got some arrangements with care providers to provide overnight short breaks, or otherwise known as respite, for younger, in our term, younger adults, which means people under the age of 65. And what we're interested in is trying to make sure that we've got a good range of providers that we can call on should we need to put a contract in place. Because at the moment, the main mechanism for people to access short breaks is either through using a direct payment or through accessing the council's own in-house service, which is called Bonsall View. The capacity of that is quite limited, and so what we're interested in is just trying to get a wider range of organisations on a contract with us. And what the report goes into detail about is the mechanism by which we want to do that, which I won't unless you want me to. It's a particular procurement tool that allows organisations to join the framework at any particular point. It's not kind of a one chance. It allows it to remain open. So it helps us really if there's a new organisation coming into Derby, they can join the list, so to speak. But because it's a new tender, we do need to get Cabinet approval. We're hoping to delegate authority to Andy Smith so that actually once we've been out to tender, we can enter into the contracts. And actually we want to have this arrangement in place for up to 10 years so that we don't have to keep going back out. There's no obligation that we will actually commission any services through the framework. It's just really so that we've got those contracts in place should we need them. But we do think that we will use them. Although at the moment, obviously, we have seen a bit of a downturn in demand for these sorts of activities, partly because of people's anxieties, really, I suppose, around coronavirus. But actually, if we think about the longer term, we are expecting, particularly carers who've been managing their loved ones at home, to really need a break and some respite. So this is ultimately who this is aimed at. So I think that's probably it, really. We will be doing some engagement with a variety of people on the detailed service specification, and that will include some parent carers themselves, as well as individuals who we already know access short breaks. And so we always do that as part of our sort of process before we go out to tender, really to make sure that what we end up putting out there to get interested providers for is actually something that is needed and that the market is willing to deliver for us. So that will be the next step, really. If we get approval tomorrow, we'll be going out and doing some of that stakeholder engagement about the fine details. So happy to take any questions.
Yeah, that's great, Kirsty. Thanks very much. Any questions of Kirsty about the report?
Chair, yes, please. Myself.
Okay. Yeah, Lucy.
I think this is a really good thing to be doing in principle, because there have been concerns that there are families struggling with looking after particularly young adults with severe physical and mental health issues and so on. So to actually have more resource for this sort of area is going to be important. But I just wondered the background in the report where it talks about other significant implications. There's a comment of none noted. Now this is a sector which tends to be predominantly women's employment, I guess, and there's a bit of presumption there. I haven't done any research in this, but it usually is. And here we are looking at opportunities that are going to be called in as and when, which is sort of the gig economy. And so it's tending to move more women into that sort of insecure employment. And I would have thought that that was something that we ought to be considering, even if we make the same decision. I think it should be we should be aware of that, and I just wondered whether there would been any thought given to that as part of this process.
Okay, I can pick that up unless Martin wants to. I mean, I suppose what we're trying to do, there's different ways you can enter into contracts with suppliers. You can have a contract for a fixed amount of service and then, pay them on a frequent, regular basis, and therefore they've got certainty. And yes, they can then operate their business model so that maybe they don't need to rely on I suppose temporary arrangements. They can actually have salaried staff. I suppose what's difficult with this scenario is we don't know yet exactly how many individuals will want the council to organise a break for them. That's partly because we are a provider ourselves, so at the moment we're just working up a way to get our service back open, because obviously it's been temporarily closed. But in normal times, most most of the demand we actually manage ourselves in-house. So, you know, we are a player in the market, so to speak. And then the other way that people access these particular types of service is they take the cash from us in a direct payment, and they organise it themselves, the individual or their family. And in those scenarios, they're buying some sort of service off an established organisation. So I suppose what this tender is doing is saying that we can't enter into a contract with just one organisation because that doesn't give us choice. We can't enter into fixed contracts with lots of organisations because we can't guarantee the business. So what the contract is trying to say is we will have a contract in place with you so that if an individual needs us to organise care on their behalf, we will come to you. I mean, obviously what that will look like will be different for different organisations. So, for example, some organisations will already have a fairly established service, and really they'll be on a number of frameworks like this where they are almost a trusted trader, that they can do business with a host council, and how they then operate their staffing arrangements, I suppose, will vary. But then there may well be organisations who haven't necessarily got an established service who will want to join the arrangements with us and will have to scale up as and when work comes to them. So yes, I mean, I think, you know, there is a fundamental issue generally in the care market that it is demand led. And I think what's difficult is there is just simply not enough resources, sadly, to be able to guarantee demand for a wide enough range of providers that they can avoid using highly flexible staffing arrangements. So I think, you know, if we could guarantee the money and we could guarantee demand, then we could, in theory, look at a different contracting model. But because we're reliant on individuals choosing whether they want us to help them or not, we couldn't enter into a contract that we haven't got the means to pay. And actually, in some instances, you know, there may well be some organisations who never end up getting a request for work. But I think, I mean, what we can do is make sure that when we go out to tender, we're very clear that, you know, this is a demand-led piece of work. You know, it's how we operate a number of contracts. And whilst, you know, we recognise that that is difficult for organisations in terms of their planning, that actually if we can give some certainty, then we would do that. But the only way we could really do that would be to actually reduce some choice to individuals and say, well, you can't have the money and organise it yourself. We are going to take the volumes and you'll go with who we pick. So it is difficult because in creating choice, you do end up inadvertently have a sort of sector that has to react for it's almost become like a consumer transaction, isn't it, really, rather than a service that's bought and is guaranteed. So I think, sadly, Lucy, there just isn't really a way round it. But certainly we could, and, you know, if you're minded to raise the point tomorrow, it's whether we can make sure that our expectations around how the tender will operate are very clear to the bidders so that they at least know what they're getting themselves into.
Yeah, I think that's probably all you can do, as you've explained. That's a very comprehensive answer from Kirsty, and which will spell out the parameters about what we can and what we can't do. Any more comments at all?
Chair, may I just say I think that was very well argued, and it's a pity really that it wasn't included in the paper in the first place, because obviously all the thinking and knowledge was there, and I think it's good to be open within this.
Yeah.
But it was, I think it was implicit, but you've teased it out, and I thank you for that, Lucy.
So
okay,
I'm going to put forward a recommendation in those. I'm just typing something, which I'll share with you shortly.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Any more comments while Lucy's typing? If not, we're waiting on Lucy's keyboard skills to get this recommendation to us, which I'm sure she'll... Okay. Right, let's talk amongst yourselves. Alex, in these situations, do individuals have to type them out, or can we, speed it up by them verbalising it and you, Lindsay, or Stephen just capturing it?
Chair, if I can come in on this point, I think
sure.
It's very important that we have it written down in front of us, so that when it's read out, we all agree, and that you as members then know what you're taking a vote on.
I understand.
And there's no, we've got it exactly as it needs to be.
That's fair enough. Okay, we'll see it there. Kirsty, what do you think to that? So including the tender paperwork and acknowledgement of the balance between choice and the risk being, what do you think?
I mean, we can certainly do that. Obviously, I can't vote on whether you should put that forward, but that is a feasible ask. It's not something that's unrealistic.
Yeah. I just want to put on the old project. Okay, Lucy. Yeah, I think that's quite reasonable.
Sorry, Chair. For the benefit of people who might be watching the live stream, can we just read out the recommendation in full? Because obviously they're not able to read the conversation.
Okay. The recommendation is to include in the tender paperwork an acknowledgement of the balance being choice on behalf of the service user and risk being shared between the provider and any casual employees. I'm personally quite happy with that. What about other members?
Happy with that, Chair.
Absolutely fine. Yeah.
Yeah, and as Lucy said, that the preamble says we ask Cabinet too. So is everybody okay? So yeah, we'll put that forward, please. All right. Any objections to that? If there's not, we'll move up. Thank you very much, Kirsty. Really grateful. Can we move on to, unless there are any more comments, we'll move on to item 9. Thanks, Kirsty. This is the appointment of the academy sponsor for new primary school at Castle Ward. Kirsty, you're more than welcome to stay with us, but if you need to get off, please feel free. Okay, right, is it Gamal?
Thank you, Chair. Happy to pick this up.
Thank you.
Great. If I draw out the headlines,
Sure.
As members will know, this relates to the new Castle Ward school project underway for September 2021 opening. As part of that process, the council needs to appoint a sponsor who, in effect, from a multi-academy trust, will operate that school, and we're legally required to do that. 1.4 in the report outlines that a competition process has now been completed. It was launched in February for 6 weeks, and potential sponsors submitted their bids. 1.5 outlines that competition process was in accordance with the DfE guidelines, Department for Education guidelines, and all bids have been evaluated. And 1.6 in the report outlines that it is the Secretary of State that takes the final decision, and therefore there is an exempt report on the agenda which provides feedback to members in taking that decision in terms of cabinet, and that remains confidential until the Secretary of State makes the announcement on their preferred bidder. So the recommendation is to approve the Council's preferred sponsor for Castlewood Primary School as a recommendation to the Secretary of State, and further specific details, Chair, are included in the exempt report. Happy to take questions on this public report.
Thank you very much, Gamal. Any questions, please? If not, then thank you very much for that. The recommendations are as printed. We'll note that report. Okay, now we move into the confidential part of the meeting. Who wants to read the notice? Is that you, Stephen?
Yeah, I can read that, Chair. So the for you to consider the resolution that under Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following items on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information.
Great, thank you very much. Do we wait a minute or two? Would you suggest, Stephen, Alex, for people to depart, or has that automatically happened?
Chair, if that's all agreed by the members, I'll just wait for an indication from my colleague that the broadcast has ended. and then there's just one thing I need to do after that when I've had that confirmation.
Members are okay with that, so I take it. I've had